When I rented the room in that old house, I was in my second year of college and money was tight. I needed a cheap place close to campus, and the deal offered by Mr. Jack seemed perfect. He was a thin man in his 60s, with a peculiar way of speaking, like he weighed every word before saying it. The room he offered was simple, with a worn wooden bed and a window overlooking a neglected garden. But the rent was almost half the price of other places I had visited. The only condition he insisted on was that I never, under any circumstances, try to open the locked room upstairs. At the time I thought it was strange, but I didn't want to appear curious. I shrugged it off and agreed. After all, who was I to judge someone else's quirks? For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. I spent most of my days out, between classes and my internship, and at night, all I wanted was to collapse into bed and sleep. The house was incredibly quiet, except for the occasional sound of Mr. Jack's footsteps as he moved around his room next to mine. But one night, I woke up to a noise I couldn't immediately identify. It was faint, like a continuous scratching sound, coming from upstairs. I tried to ignore it, thinking it might be an animal stuck in the attic or something, but as the days passed, the noise grew louder and more persistent. I started to notice a pattern. It always began around 3 in the morning and lasted for 10 or 15 minutes. I tried convincing myself it was all in my head, but it was impossible to ignore, especially when, one night, I heard something that sounded like heavy breathing coming from behind that locked door. I couldn't just ignore it anymore. Asking Mr. Jack seemed out of the question. He was friendly enough, but he had a way of avoiding any personal topics. Besides, he always kept the door locked with a huge key that he carried in his coat pocket, like it was a treasure. The morning after another sleepless night, I worked up the courage to bring it up casually. I mentioned rats and asked if he had heard anything. He stopped what he was doing, looked at me over his glasses, and said in a disturbingly calm tone, "Just remember our agreement. Don't go into that room." The way he said it left me feeling uneasy, as if he knew exactly what I was hearing and just wanted me to stop asking. That night, something new happened. The scratching noise began again, but this time it was louder, more frantic. I got up and went to the bottom of the stairs, using my phone as a flashlight. Every step creaked under my weight, making my heart race like the house itself was warning me to turn back. When I reached the locked door, I stood there for a moment, pressing my ear against the cold wood. The noise stopped abruptly, as if whatever, or whoever was inside, knew I was there. Before I could move, I heard a low, guttural sound, something between a growl and a whisper, coming directly from the other side. That's when I saw the marks, deep scratches on the doorframe, as if something had tried to claw its way out. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed in my room with the lights on, staring at the door, trying to process what I had seen. The scratches on the wood looked fresh, like they had been made that very night. And that sound? It wasn't something any normal animal would make, I was sure of that. My mind raced with wild theories. Maybe Mr. Jack was hiding some exotic animal, or maybe it was something far worse, something I didn't even want to think about. No matter how hard I tried to convince myself to let it go, there was a part of me that couldn't. I needed to know what was going on, even if it meant breaking the one rule he had set. The next night, I decided to investigate. I waited for Mr. Jack to leave for his nightly walk, something he did religiously at 8 o'clock. I grabbed a hairpin, and with the help of a few quick tutorials on my phone, tried to pick the lock. My hands were shaking so much that I almost gave up, but after a few minutes, I heard the click. My heart pounded in my ears as I pushed the door open, which creaked long and loud. The smell hit me first, a mix of mold and something metallic, like rust or blood. The dim light from the hallway barely illuminated the room, but I could make out the outline of an abandoned bedroom, with furniture draped in sheets and a thick layer of dust covering everything. What caught my attention most, though, was a mark on the floor, a perfect circle, drawn with something dark and dry, made with unnerving precision. I hesitated before stepping inside, as if crossing that threshold was a point of no return. But curiosity, or maybe something stronger, something irresistible, pushed me forward. Every step made the floor creak under my feet, and I could barely breathe because of the smell and the heavy atmosphere. I examined the circle more closely and noticed symbols around it, drawn with eerie precision. I didn't recognize any of them, but there was something unsettling about the way they seemed to look back at me. Near the circle, an old wooden chair lay toppled over, its legs scratched as if something had thrashed against it. That's when I heard a sound behind me, a soft creak, like something or someone had just entered the room. I turned so fast I almost lost my balance, but there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway, dimly lit. For a moment I thought about running, but something kept me frozen in place. Then I realized the sound hadn't come from the door but from the closet in the corner of the room. It was one of those old wardrobes, with heavy wooden doors and rusty handles. I don't know what possessed me to approach it, but as I placed my hand on the handle, I felt a chill run through my body, as if the air had turned ice cold. I turned the handle slowly, the metal groaning like a scream in the silence. When I opened the door, all I saw was darkness, but there was something in there. A strong smell, the same metallic scent as before, and suddenly, heavy, rhythmic breathing. My instinct was to slam the closet door shut, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like something invisible was holding me there, forcing me to confront the emptiness in front of me. The breathing grew louder, almost suffocating, and then I saw them. Two glowing points, like eyes, reflecting the faint light from the hallway. They weren't normal eyes. They were small, yellowish, and seemed to pulsate, as if they were alive in a way I couldn't comprehend. My whole body froze. The feeling of being watched was so intense that I could almost physically feel it, pressing down on my chest. Somehow I managed to step back and slam the door shut with a bang that echoed through the entire house. I ran out of the room without looking back. I stumbled down the stairs and locked myself in my room, my heart racing so fast it felt like it might burst. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the corner, clutching my phone, but I didn't have the courage to call anyone or leave the house. What could I even say? That I saw eyes in the closet? That I broke Mr. Jack's one rule, and now something was there? It didn't feel real, but I knew what I had seen. Around 5 in the morning, I heard his slow, deliberate footsteps ascending the stairs. He stopped outside my room, stood there for what felt like an eternity, and then continued toward the locked room. The only sound after that was the turning of the key in the lock. The next day I was in a daze. I couldn't go to class or leave my room. I kept trying to make sense of what had happened, but nothing added up. Every now and then, I heard Mr. Jack moving around the house as if everything were normal. That evening, I finally worked up the courage to confront him. I waited until I saw him in the kitchen and tried to act casual, but he noticed right away that something was off. "You went into the room, didn't you?" he asked, without any pretense. I couldn't lie. He sighed deeply, removed his glasses, and rubbed his face, like he was carrying a weight he couldn't bear anymore. "I warned you for a reason. You shouldn't have done that." Before I could respond, he started talking, more to himself than to me. "That room, it shouldn't exist. I've tried to get rid of it, burned it, sealed it, but it always comes back." The way he spoke was disturbingly calm, like he had already accepted the absurdity of the situation. "Whatever's in there isn't from here. It never was. You heard it, didn't you? And saw it too." All I could do was nod, unable to say a word. He looked at me with an expression that was a mix of pity and exhaustion. "You need to leave. That thing already knows who you are. And if you stay here, it will get worse." His words chilled me to my core, but deep down I knew he was right. Something had changed in that house, and I didn't want to find out what would happen if I stayed. The next morning I started packing without wasting any time. I didn't want to spend another night in that house, but something told me it wouldn't be that easy. Every sound, every shadow felt amplified, like the whole house was watching me. Mr. Jack didn't say anything else, but he watched me from a distance, as if waiting for something to happen at any moment. When I was putting the last bag in my car, I heard a sound that froze me. The same scratching, coming from upstairs. Only this time, it was louder, more desperate. Against all logic, I looked up at the window of the locked room. For a brief moment, I swear I saw a figure. Tall, thin, and twisted, with glowing yellow eyes piercing the darkness. I blinked, and it was gone. I drove away as fast as I could without looking back. For weeks, I had nightmares. I dreamed of that heavy breathing, the scratches on the door, the eyes watching me. I always woke up feeling like something was in my room watching me. I even moved to another city, trying to leave it all behind, but some things just don't go away. To this day, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that something is standing at my bedroom door, watching me. I've never had the courage to look because deep down, I think I know what it is. That thing from the locked room never stayed behind, and somehow, I think it's still waiting for me. I've never told this story to anyone, at least not in person. I've always been afraid people would think I'm crazy, or worse, that talking about it might give it some kind of power to come back. Sometimes I wonder what exactly was in that house and why Mr. Jack still lives there. He knew more than he let on, I'm sure of that. But I also know that if I tried to contact him, I'd be risking bringing it back into my life. Maybe it's a secret he keeps because he knows no one would believe him. Or maybe because no one else could deal with it. One thing I'm certain of, though, I've never rented a room without knowing exactly what's behind every door in the house. Sometimes, when I'm alone and the house is quiet, I find myself listening, paying attention, waiting to hear that scratching or that breathing. It might seem paranoid, but after what I went through, I don't think you can be too careful. I don't know what it was, or why it chose me. All I know is, if I ever hear that sound again, I'll run and never look back. And if you ever find a house with a room that can never be opened, do yourself a favor. Don't stay to find out why. Back then, I was 16 years old and lived with my parents on a farm in rural Minnesota. It was one of those places where the only light you saw at night came from the stars, and the loudest sounds were crickets, or sometimes the wind rustling through the trees. My parents had gone to visit my grandmother that night, about 2 hours away, and I stayed home to take care of the animals. It wasn't unusual for me to be alone, and I even enjoyed the quiet of the countryside, most of the time. But that night, something felt off from the start. The wind was stronger than usual, and an eerie silence hung in the air, like the night itself was holding its breath. It was past 11 p.m. and I was almost ready to go to bed when I heard the sound. A loud crack, followed by the unmistakable shattering of glass. I jumped out of bed, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it echoed through the house. I ran to my bedroom window and looked outside. The sky was pitch black, but I could make out the silhouette of our barn in the distance, dimly lit by the porch light. Grabbing a flashlight, I hesitated before putting on my boots. My dad always kept a loaded rifle by the back door. "Just in case a coyote shows up," he'd say. I grabbed the rifle more as a precaution than anything else. Deep down, I hoped it was just the wind knocking something over. But something inside me knew it wasn't. Each step toward the barn made the crunch of dry leaves beneath my boots seem louder than usual. The flashlight beam flickered with the wind, lighting up the path ahead and casting strange shadows on the trees around me. As I got closer, I could see one of the barn's side windows completely shattered, the shards gleaming on the ground like pieces of ice. I stopped for a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to hear anything that might give me a clue about what was happening inside. But all I could hear was the wind, now accompanied by a faint creaking coming from the barn. I slowly pushed the wooden door open, the creak of the hinges echoing in the silence. The smell of hay and damp wood filled my nose, but there was something different in the air. a strange smell, like spoiled food or something rotting. Sweeping the beam of my flashlight across the barn, I noticed things were out of place. A pile of hay had been dragged to the corner, with old blankets that weren't ours thrown on top, forming what looked like a makeshift bed. Nearby, there were empty food cans, several of them opened with what looked like a hunting knife. My fingers instinctively tightened around the rifle. This wasn't just the wind. Someone had been living here. As I tried to process what I was seeing, a low noise, like heavy footsteps on the barn's upper floor, made my heart stop for a second. It was slow, dragging, like someone trying to move quietly. I quickly lifted the flashlight, shining it toward the old wooden ceiling, but I couldn't see anything. My first instinct was to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. A million thoughts raced through my mind. Who could be up there? Why? And worse, what would they do if they realized I was here? Taking a deep breath, I took a few steps back, keeping my eyes on the upper level. Then another detail caught my attention. Footprints on the barn floor, imprinted in the dry, muddy hay. They were fresh, large, like those of an adult man. I followed the trail with the flashlight, and my stomach churned when I realized where they led. The footprints exited the barn, but the most disturbing part was that they didn't head away from the property. They were leading toward the house, my house. My eyes darted back to the shattered window and then to the trail of footprints. Someone had left the barn and was heading straight for where I slept. My mind spiraled. Whoever it was, they were heading to the house while I was still out in the open. With the flashlight trembling in my hand, I forced myself to leave the barn, clutching the rifle tightly. My boots crunched against the gravel as I quickened my pace, my eyes darting between the house and the trail of muddy footprints. The closer I got, the heavier the sense of being watched grew, like someone was studying me from the shadows. When I reached the porch, my hands were so sweaty I almost dropped the rifle. The front door was ajar. I was sure I had locked it before leaving. I pushed the door open slowly, trying not to make a sound, and stepped inside. The smell of old wood mixed with candle wax was familiar, but now it felt suffocating. The house was steeped in silence, a silence that pressed down on me like a weight. Muddy footprints covered the floor, leading from the entryway to the stairs that went up to the bedrooms. My bedroom. My heart felt like it would burst out of my chest. I wanted to call the police, but my phone was upstairs, charging on the nightstand. And even if I mustered the courage to go up, something told me I wasn't alone. Suddenly, a creak echoed from upstairs, and I stopped breathing. Climbing those stairs was the last thing I wanted to do, but I couldn't just stand there, waiting for whatever was up there to come to me. My feet moved up the steps slowly, each creak of the wood sounding like a gunshot in the silence. The rifle trembled slightly in my hands, and I tried to steady my breathing. When I reached the top, the hallway seemed longer than usual, each door a potential threat, each shadow a possible ambush. My room was the last one on the right, and the footprints went straight to it. The door was slightly ajar, swaying lightly in the breeze from a window I had forgotten to close. I stepped toward the door, flashlight aimed inside. The room looked empty, but everything was out of place. The bed was unmade, my school backpack had been rummaged through, and the closet was open, with clothes scattered on the floor. I took a step inside, and in that moment, a chill ran down my spine. The air felt heavier, denser. The flashlight's beam swept across the room, and then I saw it. A pair of muddy boots sticking out from under the bed. For a second, time seemed to stop. It wasn't something I could imagine. Someone was lying there, hiding, breathing so quietly I almost didn't notice. My first impulse was to step back, but the creak of the wood under my boots must have betrayed me. The boots under the bed shifted abruptly, and before I could react, something started crawling out. My body froze. The flashlight trembled so much in my hand that the light wavered, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. Then he appeared. It was a man, dirty, with a scruffy beard and wild, desperate eyes. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at me like he was deciding what to do next. Without thinking, I raised the rifle and shouted at him to stop. My voice came out louder and shakier than I expected, but it was enough to make him hesitate. He slowly raised his hands, his wild eyes locked on mine. I just needed a place to stay," he muttered, his voice hoarse and barely audible. But something about him felt off. His eyes didn't look scared or remorseful. They were cold, calculating. Then, as if realizing I had let my guard down for a second, he lunged at me. The impact was so quick I barely had time to react. He shoved the rifle aside and we both crashed to the floor. The flashlight rolled under the bed, plunging the room into dim shadows. I fought with everything I had, but he was stronger, driven by some kind of insane desperation. In the chaos, I managed to grab the rifle again, and with an instinctive move, I struck him on the head with the butt of it. He fell to the side, groaning in pain but still conscious. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. I scrambled to my feet, holding the rifle as if my life depended on it. Because it did. "Get out of here, now!" I yelled, aiming the rifle at him, my hands still shaking. He slowly backed away, his eyes still fixed on me with that cold, almost inhuman stare. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice low, almost like a warning. I watched as he got to his feet, limping out of the room. I followed him at a safe distance, not taking my eyes off him, as he descended the stairs and disappeared into the darkness outside. I stood there for minutes, trying to comprehend what had just happened. After he vanished into the night, I locked every door and window in the house, checking them 2 or 3 times. My whole body was trembling, and I could barely hold the rifle properly. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand upstairs, my hands slick with sweat, and called the police. My voice was so shaky I had to repeat myself several times before they understood what had happened. They said they'd send a unit, but being in a rural area, it would take some time for them to arrive. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, the rifle in my lap, listening to every little sound outside, the wind seeming to whisper things I didn't want to hear. When the police finally arrived, they searched the barn and the surrounding area but found nothing except the footprints. They told me it was probably just a drifter looking for shelter, but the way that man looked at me, the tone of his words, suggested something far more sinister. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep properly. Every little noise from the barn or the yard made my heart race, and I'd go through the house checking every lock like a paranoid person. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he really wanted, but I've never felt truly safe on that farm again. The fear that he might return still lingers, like a shadow that won't go away. I've never been the kind of person who believed in strange things or scary stories. I'm more of a practical thinker, someone who always looks for logical explanations. This happened about 2 years ago when I was working from home, editing texts for a small publishing house. My schedule was a mess, so it wasn't unusual for me to be awake in the middle of the night. I lived alone in a simple house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind with poorly lit streets and low fences. That night I was sitting on the couch with my laptop trying to finish some work, when I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't loud or insistent, but just enough to pull me out of my concentration. I looked at the clock. 2:37 a.m. It already seemed strange for someone to show up at that hour, but at first, I ignored it. Then the knock came again, louder this time. I got up, feeling a knot of unease in my chest, like something wasn't quite right. I peeked out the side window, pulling the curtain just slightly to avoid making any noise. That's when I saw an older man, maybe in his 70s, standing on my porch. He was holding a paper bag, the kind you see in American movies, filled with groceries. He seemed harmless, wearing a faded brown sweater and loose pants, but what caught my attention was the way he stared at the door without blinking. When I opened the window to ask what he wanted, he took a step back, as if nervous, and said he was lost. He claimed he'd gone out to buy groceries and needed to use the phone to call someone. At first it seemed like a simple situation, but something about him felt off. I didn't want to seem rude, but I also didn't want to let a stranger into my house in the middle of the night. I explained that I couldn't help and suggested he try the neighbor's house. He just stood there for a few seconds, as if he hadn't heard me, then mumbled something I couldn't make out. That's when I noticed something that made me even more uncomfortable. His grocery bag was almost empty, holding only a box of cereal, and what looked like a can of soup. Who goes out at 2 in the morning to buy just that? Before I could think of anything else to say, he placed the bag on the porch, stepped back a few feet, and started pacing the sidewalk. He muttered incoherent words, shaking his head as he moved back and forth. I closed the window, trying to ignore the chill running down my spine. I went back to the couch, but I couldn't focus anymore. It felt like his presence outside had tainted the air in my house. I sat there, listening to his footsteps, which grew more erratic with each pass. I grabbed my phone, thinking about calling the police, but when I peeked out the window again, he was no longer on the sidewalk. The sudden silence made my chest tighten. I looked at the grocery bag on the porch, and for some reason I felt an overwhelming urge not to open it. It was an instinct, almost primal, as if something inside it wasn't right. I tried convincing myself that the worst was over. Maybe he realized he wouldn't get any help and just left. Even so, the bag on the porch seemed to stare at me, as if waiting for me to do something. After a lot of hesitation, I grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, trying not to make any noise. Outside, the air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and the damp smell of the bag was stronger than it should have been. I crouched down and took a quick look inside. Besides the cereal and the soup can, there was what appeared to be a piece of clothing folded up. But the fabric was wet, like it had been soaked in dirty water. I didn't want to touch it. Every instinct told me to leave it and go back inside. As I was closing the door, I heard light footsteps on the pavement. My breathing hitched. I peeked through the crack in the door and saw him again, but this time he wasn't alone. A woman, wearing a worn floral dress with long hair partially covering her face, stood next to him. She seemed to be smiling, but something about her smile made my skin crawl. It was too wide, like it had been stretched unnaturally. They both stood there staring at me without saying a word. The woman was holding the man's hand as if he were a child. The faint streetlight cast shadows that looked distorted, unnaturally elongated. I shut the door quickly and locked it, but I knew that wouldn't be enough. I leaned against the door, trying to hear any sounds outside. I couldn't tell if it was my heart pounding or footsteps, but something inside me knew they were still there. I grabbed my phone again, determined to call the police this time, but as I tried unlocking it, the lights in the house started flickering. It wasn't just a random power surge. The bulbs pulsed, like something was draining their energy. My phone turned off by itself. A shiver ran down my spine. I rushed to the window to see if I could spot them, but what I saw instead was worse. The grocery bag was now open, and what looked like a small action camera was sitting among the items. But that wasn't what terrified me. When I glanced at the window's glass, I saw a reflection that shouldn't have been there. The woman, with her frozen smile, standing behind me. I spun around in a panic, but the hallway was empty. My mind was spiraling. It was as if everything around me had turned into a nightmare I couldn't escape. Then, a loud knock on the door jolted me back to reality. It was sharper this time, accompanied by a whisper, "Let us in, please." I backed away from the door, trembling. That voice was different, a mix of several tones, distorted like an echo. "Please, we just want to talk," it insisted, this time closer. My mind raced, trying to find some explanation, but nothing made sense. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, not that I thought it would make much difference. All I knew was that I couldn't open the door. When I turned back to the hallway, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The camera from the bag was now on the floor, pointed directly at me. I blinked, trying to process what I was seeing. There was no way it could have moved on its own. I grabbed a cloth and covered the camera, ignoring the overwhelming sensation of being watched. That's when I heard footsteps on the roof. At first they were light, like an animal walking, but then they grew heavier, as if someone were dragging something. "Son, come here," the woman's voice said, now clear and unmistakable. I ran to my bedroom, locked the door, and shoved the dresser in front of it, breathing hard. My heart felt like it was about to explode. And then, everything went silent. No sounds, nothing but the pounding of my heart in my ears. I sat on the bedroom floor, still clutching the knife, trying to calm my breathing. The silence was so complete it felt unnatural. I looked at the clock on the wall, but the hands weren't moving. I grabbed my phone again, pressing the power button repeatedly, but it stayed dead. Then I heard something worse. The woman's laughter. It was low, dragged out, as if she were mocking me. I closed my eyes, trying not to panic, but the laughter grew louder, as if it was coming from inside the house. Closer and closer, and then I smelled it. A strong stench, like rotting meat mixed with chemicals, filled the room. I turned to the window, expecting to see something outside, but what I saw was inside. The camera I had covered was now sitting on my desk, pointed directly at me. My stomach churned. How had it gotten there? I took a step back, pressing myself against the wall, and that's when I heard something scraping against the wooden floor, right under the bed. My instincts screamed at me not to look, but of course, I did. When I crouched down, I saw two glowing eyes staring back at me. They were small, like a child's, but filled with an indescribable rage. I scrambled backward as fast as I could until I hit the wall. I couldn't take my eyes off the bed, expecting whatever was under there to come out at any moment. The eyes kept staring, but now the woman's laughter returned, echoing through the house. This time, it was accompanied by another voice, higher pitched, childlike, but just as unsettling. "I told him to open the door, Mom," the voice said, dragging out the words. The laughter stopped abruptly, and a loud scraping sound came from the hallway, making me jump. I was on the verge of losing it. I pressed the dresser harder against the door, but I knew I couldn't stay in the room forever. Every inch of the house felt contaminated by them. I looked back at the camera on the desk and noticed something horrifying. It had a small screen showing what it was recording. I picked it up with trembling hands and looked at the screen. My blood ran cold. The display showed my living room, but from an elevated angle, like it was being filmed from the ceiling. And in the center of the room stood the woman and the man. But now the man looked smaller, bent in impossible ways, like a large child forced into a tiny frame. I dropped the camera without thinking and felt my whole body trembling. Whatever was happening, it had gone far beyond anything rational. Suddenly, the bedroom doorknob began to turn. First, it moved slowly, almost delicately. Then came a series of rapid, forceful bangs, as if someone were slamming against it. The woman's laughter came back, but now it was right on the other side of the door, accompanied by whispers that sounded like gibberish. I gripped the knife tighter, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. The rotten smell grew stronger, almost choking me. And then, it all stopped again. Absolute silence. For a moment I thought it might be over, but then a calm, eerily soft voice came from under the bed. "Are you going to play with us now?" Before I could react, the bed was yanked back with impossible force. Something crawled out, too fast for me to make sense of it, and I felt an icy hand grip my ankle. I screamed, kicking at whatever it was, until I broke free. I bolted for the bedroom door, shoving the dresser aside, and ran without looking back. I had to get out of that house. I managed to open the front door and ran outside, feeling the cold night air hit me. I didn't even glance back. All I wanted was to put as much distance between myself and that house as possible. I only stopped when I reached the main street, with the streetlights flickering erratically. My breathing was heavy, and my legs nearly gave out from all the running. I looked around, hoping to see someone, anyone, but the street was empty. I grabbed my phone, and to my surprise, it powered on this time. I called the police and gave them a brief version of what happened, leaving out the details that would make me sound crazy. When they arrived, they took me back to the house. My stomach churned just seeing the porch. To my surprise, or maybe relief, the grocery bag was gone. The camera had disappeared too. The officers searched the house but found nothing unusual, just displaced furniture and scratch marks on the bedroom floor. One of them gave me a skeptical look, as if he thought I'd made everything up. They told me to get some rest and call again if anything else happened. I didn't have the courage to spend another night there. The next day, I put the house up for sale and never went back. To this day, I don't know what those things were or what they wanted from me. But every now and then, I still feel like I'm being watched, especially when I'm alone. I don't know if it's paranoia or if something from that night is still following me. All I know is I'll never open the door for a stranger again, no matter the time. I never thought I'd get involved in something so strange. This happened about 2 years ago when I agreed to do a favor for a coworker, Mike. He had a huge Great Dane named Duke and was going out of town for a week on a business trip. Knowing I lived alone and loved dogs, he asked if I could stay at his house to look after Duke. The house was on a quiet street in a secluded neighborhood. Even though I was used to the silence of my small apartment downtown, I thought it would be a nice chance to enjoy some peace. Mike left me detailed instructions: how to feed Duke, how to use the security cameras, and even a step-by-step guide on how to turn off the lights at night. He was meticulous, almost paranoid, but I didn't think much of it. The first night was uneventful. Duke was a sweetheart despite his intimidating size, and the house felt cozy, with that family home vibe I've always admired. But on the second night, I noticed something odd. Around 11:30 p.m., the porch light started flickering. It wasn't random, but more like someone was flipping the switch on and off. I ignored it, thinking it was just an old bulb, and eventually went to bed. However, on the third night, it happened again, at exactly the same time. The sound of the flickering was irritating, a repetitive clicking noise that cut through the silence of the house. I checked the switch, but everything seemed normal. Probably just need to tell Mike to replace the bulb, I thought. On the fourth night, the pattern repeated itself. It was like clockwork. 11:30 p.m., and the light began to flicker. This time, something felt off. Duke, who usually slept at the foot of the couch while I watched TV, suddenly stood up and walked to the front door. He stood there, alert, his ears perked up and his gaze fixed. My heart skipped a beat. I got up slowly, trying not to make any noise, and went to him. I cracked the door open just enough to peek outside, but the street was deserted. The cold wind rustled the trees, and the only sound I heard was the faint shuffle of dry leaves across the ground. I forced myself to believe it was just the flickering light bothering Duke and closed the door. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered. On the fifth night, things escalated. When the light started flickering, I decided to check the security cameras Mike had taught me how to use. There were 4 angles: the front entry, the porch, the backyard, and the garage. I put the porch feed on the TV and held my breath. In the corner of the screen, a hooded figure appeared, fiddling with the light. It wasn't an electrician or someone trying to fix the bulb. It was clearly someone with suspicious intentions. The hood obscured their face, and their movements were slow, almost calculated. My blood ran cold. Without thinking much, I grabbed my phone to call the police but hesitated before dialing. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe someone was lost. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The door creaked as I opened it, and the chilly night air sent a shiver down my spine. Duke stood behind me, uneasy, as if he sensed something was wrong. The porch light was still flickering, but there was no sign of the hooded figure. I walked slowly toward the switch, trying not to make any noise, holding the flashlight tightly in my hand. The silence was oppressive, interrupted only by the faint chirping of crickets and the rustling of trees. When I reached the porch, I looked around but saw nothing. The feeling of being watched persisted, and honestly, I almost retreated back into the house. Then I noticed something on the door, a piece of paper taped to it. My hands trembled as I grabbed it, and when I turned it over, the handwritten message made me freeze. "We know you're here." I rushed back inside, locking the door behind me. Duke started barking uncontrollably, the sound echoing through the house. My mind was racing. Who could have left that note? And why? I didn't know anyone in the neighborhood and didn't have any enemies that I knew of. I turned on every light in the house, trying to push away the dread crawling up my chest, but the sense of unease only grew. I decided to re-watch the security footage to understand what had happened. My stomach churned as I reviewed the recording. The hooded figure appeared again on the screen, walking slowly across the porch. When they stopped at the door, they tilted their head as if listening to something. Then, with deliberate movements, they left the note and looked directly at the camera before leaving. But the most terrifying detail was what made me nearly drop the remote. Their eyes glowed in the dark. After watching that recording, I was officially terrified. I called Mike, even knowing he was in a different time zone, and explained everything. He was silent for a moment before saying, "Man, that's never happened before. I've got neighbors who might pull pranks, but nobody would mess with my house like that." His response didn't help at all. What made me even more nervous was his suggestion. "Lock everything up and stay with Duke. I'll get someone to check on you in the morning." Waiting until morning felt impossible. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife to feel at least a little safer. Duke kept pacing back and forth in the living room, as if trying to warn me about something. It was 2 a.m. when I heard the sound. A knock, faint and repetitive, like someone scratching at the living room window. The noise made my heart race, and for a moment I froze. I turned off the lights and crept to the window, peeking through the blinds. Outside, in the darkness, I saw the same hooded figure standing in the middle of the yard, staring directly at the house. I couldn't make out their face, but their posture was menacing. It was like they knew I was watching and didn't bother to hide. Instead, they raised a hand and pointed at the door. I yanked the curtain shut and backed away, breathing hard. The tension was unbearable, and I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there, waiting for things to get worse. With trembling hands, I called the police. I explained the situation as quickly as I could, trying to stay calm while Duke kept barking like crazy, his barks echoing through the house like a warning. The dispatcher said they'd send a patrol, but it might take some time due to the area's location. Those minutes of waiting felt like hours. I sat in the dark, watching the live feed from the cameras. The hooded figure was no longer in the yard. For a moment I thought they might have left, but then I heard a sound from upstairs. Footsteps. Slowly above me, someone was walking as if exploring the house. My stomach churned. Had I gone upstairs before coming in? Did I lock all the windows? I clutched the knife tightly and called Duke, who reluctantly followed me upstairs, growling softly. Each step creaked, amplifying the oppressive silence. At the top of the stairs, the footsteps stopped. I opened each door cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. First the guest room, empty. Then the bathroom, nothing. When I opened the last door, the master bedroom, I saw the window wide open. A cold wind blew the curtains, and on the floor there were dirt marks, as if someone had climbed inside and walked around. Another note was taped to the mirror. This time, the message was even more chilling. "You shouldn't have gone outside." I could barely breathe. "You shouldn't have gone outside" meant they knew I had stepped out to check the porch light. My heart was racing as I tried to figure out what to do. Duke, normally so calm, growled in a low, guttural way, as if something was there that I couldn't see. I locked the bedroom window and checked the others, one by one, to make sure they were secure. Every little noise the house made felt amplified, and my mind began imagining the worst. When I finally went downstairs, I noticed something even stranger. The dining room chairs had been flipped upside down, all aligned symmetrically, as if someone wanted to send a message. Duke stood by the front door, growling softly but with a look of near panic, as if begging me to leave. The clock read 2:30 a.m. when I heard the faint scratching sound again, this time coming from the front door. I approached cautiously, clutching the knife even tighter. Duke barked wildly, his barks reverberating through the house like an urgent warning. I peeked through the peephole, but the street was empty. Still, the scratching sound continued, like someone dragging their nails across the wood. I finally worked up the courage to open the door quickly, ready to confront whoever was there. But outside, there was only another note taped to the door, swaying in the wind. The message, written hastily this time, read, "Last chance. Leave." By this point, I was at my breaking point. I grabbed Duke and barricaded us in the bedroom, taking the knife, my phone, and a chair to block the door. I didn't know what to expect anymore, or who could possibly be doing this. I sat on the floor, leaning against the bed, trying to think of a plan. Duke stayed by my side, restless, but he seemed to understand that we needed to stay quiet. Hours dragged on, and I found myself dozing off, exhaustion finally taking over. I woke to a sound, not banging, but tapping. It wasn't on the bedroom door, it was on the window. My blood ran cold. We were on the second floor, and there was no logical way someone could reach that window without a ladder. With the flashlight from my phone trembling in my hand, I slowly approached the curtain. Duke growled but didn't move, as if he was just as scared as I was. I pulled back a corner of the curtain just enough to peek outside. On the other side of the glass was the hooded face, the same one from before, staring right at me. Its eyes glowed unnaturally in the darkness. The figure remained still for a few seconds, and then tilted its head, like it was studying me. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. Before I could react, the sound of sirens pierced through the night. The police had finally arrived. When I looked back at the window, the figure was gone, as if it had never been there. I ran downstairs to let the officers in, Duke following close behind me, still on edge, but seeming somewhat relieved by the presence of others. I quickly explained everything to the officers, struggling to sound coherent as I recounted the bizarre events. They searched the house and the yard but found no one. When I told them about the hooded figure, the notes, and the footsteps upstairs, I could see skepticism in their faces. One of them suggested it might have been a cruel prank, possibly by teenagers in the area. But I knew it wasn't that, though I didn't argue. I asked them to keep an eye on the neighborhood that night, and they left, promising to return if anything else happened. After they left, the house felt eerily quiet, almost too quiet. It was as if whatever had been tormenting me was finally gone. I stayed up the rest of the night, sitting on the couch with Duke at my side, staring at the security camera feed. Nothing happened. The next morning, Mike came back from his trip. He found me exhausted, with dark circles under my eyes and a hollow look that he later described as, like I'd seen a ghost. I told him everything, and while he didn't outright dismiss my story, I could tell he wasn't convinced. We checked the camera footage together, but somehow, the recordings from the last 2 nights were missing. Mike looked confused but not particularly frightened. Before I left, he thanked me and said he'd reinforce the house's security. To this day, I don't know who or what was in that house with me during that week. I never received any more notes, and Mike never mentioned anything unusual happening afterward. But every time I drive past that neighborhood, I get a chill down my spine and avoid looking at the house. The memory of those glowing eyes at the window still haunts me. And if you're wondering, I've never agreed to house sit or dog sit for anyone ever again.